My next guest on Motoring Talk really doesn't need an introduction. He's truly an icon of Australian motorsport. He's been a driver that's, you could say been around a little while. There's a bit of experience under this man's belt. He's been 5-time Australian touring car champion and 3 times a winner of the Bathurst 1000. He's also been inducted into the V8 Supercar Hall of Fame. And of course, I speak about none other than Dick Johnson. Dick, good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Russell. How are you?
I'm great, thank you, mate. Thanks for coming in. Firstly, let's have a look at, I guess, how the team's going currently. There's been a bit of a spring in the step and some good results in the last couple of supercar races, hasn't there?
Well, it certainly has. I think, obviously, we've got better equipment to be able to work with at this point in time because, like I've said many times, it's not any one thing that wins races. It's a combination of everything. And if one of those things fail, well, you're obviously not going to get the results. But at the moment, I think we've got most bases covered, and that's why the results are starting to come.
Do you think your cars, as you said, it's that part of that magical ingredient, but that's obviously been something that's been constantly on the evolution and the building and the development of those cars, hasn't it?
Well, it certainly has, and with the FG Falcon and the way the 888 chassis has sort of evolved, through the way it was designed. Through 888 and Ford, and it was a very collective effort that really put it all together, and I think it's very well designed. It's a very sturdy chassis, and obviously the adjustments you make a difference, and they're very infinite adjustments you can make. So you've got something really, really good to work with, a great base, and the cars are quite light. Which means you've got to put a lot of lead in, so that allows you to put lead in the places that would suit you best, and from there, we've got a good engine package, so we've got a pretty good package all around.
I want to talk to you a little bit more about the history of your cars and your whole racing team, but before we do, we touched on briefly there with the 888 chassis. The announcement that they're going to move to Holden next year, how much of an impact does that have on a team like yours?
Well, I don't think it's going to, certainly not going to impact us at all, because all you're going to see is that Roland Dane and the 888 people will convert everything they have and just put it in a Holden, because the cars are very, very close in specification, etc. It's just that his total package will then go into a Holden, and the only concern I have there is that I believe that the Holden currently has probably slightly less drag than what the Falcon has. Which on the longer circuits, like you saw probably at Sandown and certainly at Phillip Island and Bathurst, is going to have an effect which will give them, a slight advantage, I think. So it'll be very interesting once they get that package in there. I think they'll be a very formidable bunch of people to be able to beat.
Does that shift the balance of power, you think? I mean, as you say, it's all about parity. Is that something that is constantly something with V8s that you're constantly looking to readjust and keep both the Ford and the Holden camp steady, I guess, keep the status quo, if you like?
Well, certainly, the Aero package, when it was tested with obviously a HRT car and one of 888 cars. So now that they're putting that package into the Commodore, I feel as though they should revisit the Aero package and have a really good look to see whether one is better than the other. So, that's a debate that has to yet happen, and with a lot of changes that are obviously going to go on for next year, I think that's one of them that really could rear its ugly head.
Dick, your career there's been so many standouts in it, and some things I'd like to talk to you about today. But for the people that maybe don't know where it all started, how did the fascination and the passion for motorsport first? When did you first feel that seed start to blossom, so to speak?
At a very, very early age, because my old man, he wanted me to be an Olympic swimmer, sort of thing. And we were very good swimmers, both my sisters and myself. And we used to go training like every morning from Coorparoo all the way down to the Valley Bars, because that was the only pool that was around at that point in time. That
would have been a bit of a hike, wouldn't it?
Well, it was a fair old hike, and it's sort of 4:30 in the morning sort of thing. It wasn't a lot of fun getting young kids out of bed, and the only way that Dad could ever get me to sort of, be really interested in going training was if he let me drive the car from Coorparoo down to the Valley Bars, and like I was 8 years of age, so that was a real thrill for me, and quite frankly, that's all I ever wanted to do. I was always interested in cars, and I certainly knew that the career that I had in front of me, I was going to try like hell to be able to make it be in motorsport.
Well, you certainly have been highly successful, and I guess looking at your early career and looking at some of the cars you drove first off, obviously they were probably in a Holden more so than in a Ford in those early days, weren't they?
Oh, the very early days, because my dad was the sales manager of Eagers, which were the Holden distributors for Queensland at that point in time, and obviously I was very passionate about Holdens, yeah. But when somebody else came along and said, well, listen, it's not going to cost you anything to race, I'll be paying the bills, mate. It could have had any sort of badge on it. It wouldn't have worried me.
Yeah, it changes it when the funding's coming from somewhere, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Again, in those early days, the shift to Fords happened in 77, was that right?
Yeah, well, probably a little earlier than that. I think it was about 75 when I first drove the Brian Burt Ford, what they called a sports sedan at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 1976, I ran at Bathurst in a I think it was like a Ford Capri, mm-hmm. because we didn't have the Falcon ready at that point in time, and from there on it was like the two-door Falcons and the XDs and that, which came back onto my own sort of deal from 1980 on.
When those XCs and those two-door Falcons arrived, did you feel that your career suddenly took another 7 or 8 steps further forward? Did you find a big change there?
Well, it was a big change because we started to get into the bigger races like Bathurst and things like that, and that in itself I think is one event that everyone obviously wants to win, and to go well at Bathurst obviously gave you a bit of a profile, and I'd been searching for years to be able to get a bit of a profile, but that came along in a big hurry in 1980.
I can remember watching that race with my dad and remember Dad saying to me, see that bloke that's leading that race? He's a Queenslander. And my father was very proud of that fact, that there was a Queenslander actually leading the front of that race and ahead of probably some of the more fancied competitors.
Well, mate, I'm born and bred in Queensland. Actually, I was born in Coorparoo and lived on the south side of Brisbane virtually all my life, and only recently, after I finished racing or gave up the driving side of things, moved down to the Gold Coast.
Yeah, to Ceres Parrot, or that obviously that part of that part of the world, and a lot of teams have done exactly the same thing. A lot of teams that were Melbourne based have all sort of moved up here, haven't they?
Well, when you go testing it, you've got a pretty good chance of getting fine weather, but it's just a much better lifestyle up here.
Dick, I want to talk to you about, obviously, the Bathurst win was probably one of the major things, obviously the year before with the Rock incident. And that really did put you on the front page in terms of people who probably didn't follow motorsport. Suddenly there was, a person by public perception as a battler trying to win this race, and having something unforeseen happen like a rock landing on the track. When you first hit the rock, do you remember what you first thought?
Well, I thought, to go back half a step from there, because it was a hell of an effort to be able to convince my wife that either because in 1979, when the rules changed, the backer then, which was Brian Burt Ford, because Brian had died the year before and the business had taken over by somebody else, and from there on they said, well, look, we can't afford to keep going, we've got to stop. So I convinced my wife that we could mortgage the house and we'll buy all the bits off Brian Burt Ford and sort of basically put the deal together ourselves, because I felt that the XD was a real good package. Anyway, because I said to her, look, I can give up now and never go back to it again, and you'd live with the most miserable person you've ever met in your life, or you can live with a happy guy and let's go racing. So, and that's how it all happened. So we'd stuck an awful lot on the line, and when the Rock incident happened, at that point in time I thought, well, this is really going to sort of put egg on the face, because we'd stuck our neck out, and at that point in time, I thought, well, damn it, let's try and turn negatives into positives, and the way things panned out with people ringing in and so on and so forth, it really set us up for the following year as far as being able to have a budget to work with. But it's all one thing to have a budget. The other thing is that the amount of pressure that it put on us from the point of view of, you can't let these people down, was fairly significant, because that really sort of gets to me, that sort of stuff, and to come out the following year and win Bathurst, or win our first touring car championship and Bathurst, really to me made me feel as though I'd given back a little bit of what these people had given to me.
It was a real fairy tale, wasn't it, at that time? Yeah,
it certainly was, and at that point, I felt that we had sort of etched our mark in the system, and we could carry on from there.
If you're just joining us, my special guest in the studio today is motor racing legend Dick Johnson. Dick, I guess moving from there, and we look at the sort of XD Falcon days, moving into things like Sierras, and of course the Mustang in between all that. And again, going back to the longevity of your career, to go from those early days, look at Group C, look at Group A, into supercars, it's been an incredible ride. And again, when we got to Sierras, they were radically different from anything else we'd seen in Australian touring cars, isn't it?
They were an amazing little motor car. They were totally different from what we would ever done because they had engine management systems. They were a little 4-cylinder 2-litre engine with turbo on them. And look, on the dyno, it used to, flat out we used to run them in without the turbo hooked up, and they ran an enormous 90 horsepower flat out, and hooked the turbo up and give it a couple of bar of boost and had 680 horsepower. So
just a slight difference.
Yeah, it was a real weapon, and we knew very little about these things, and because it was an English car, and we were dealing with the POMs and certainly trying to get through with the Germans, etc., it was a pretty hard old slog because we could never get any information out of them. We had to send stuff back to get serviced, etc., and I thought, this is a joke. We really need to sort of get our hands around this and sort of really get our heads together and make our own deal here, which we did. In 1987 at Bathurst, which was the World Touring Car Championship. That was probably the worst Bathurst I could ever remember in my entire career. To have 2 cars out of the event, by about lap 5 and spending the rest of the day, it was the longest day in history when you got to spend it with your sponsors standing there on the sideline, is not really good. But that's about the turning point where we said, listen, we got to do something about this ourselves. And so we went ahead and did our own development work, and really to add salt, to the wounds that they'd given us, we thought, damn, we believe we've got our package together. Let's go over to England, and we had a sponsorship from Redcoat, the Palmer Tube Mill Group, to go over there and run the Silverstone TT. So I thought, well, we'll put all this on a plane, on a pallet, and away we went. Took it over to England. We qualified on pole by about 2.4 seconds over and above the World Touring Car Championship cars, which were the Eggenberger cars at that point in time,
right.
And Andy Rouse and these people. And we just drove off into the night, and it was just like taking coal to Newcastle. Gee, it was good. And because, I really felt embarrassed after 1987 Bathurst. I really felt embarrassed to be an Australian, thinking that, these guys thought we were a bunch of colonials. So we went and taught them a lesson and came back, feeling pretty good about ourselves.
Absolutely, with the knowledge that your Ford Sierras were the fastest in the world.
Yeah, they were. They were extremely quick motor cars and difficult to drive, but they were just a great car because they were one of those cars where you had to put your boot into the throttle long before you even turned the car into the corner to make sure it came on boost when you came out of the corner. So it was a real learning curve to be able to change for that type of vehicle.